Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be revisiting Upfront because I've left this game alone for a fair while by my standards, and B, because I've had a lot of interesting exchanges and conversations both on and off camera with quite a few of you, on and off YouTube I should say, with quite a few of you about this game and its various options. And one that I had, I suppose it was a bit of a while ago now, but that really caught my imagination was the excellent suggestion that we ought to try some optional rules relating to the British Highland regiments, or regiments that had a Highland connection of some form. Now, this actually started off as a bit of a flippant comment, but it has mushroomed in my mind, and building on this excellent suggestion, I have been tinkering with some rules that will allow a British or Commonwealth player to simulate some of the things that gave the Highland regiments their distinctive character. Now, I'm sharing these with you all today because I'd like you to try them if you want to, see what you think. I'd really love to hear back from you, but at the end of the day, these are just suggested optional rules. You may give them a try and think they're terribly atrocious. If you do, I'd love to hear from you, or you might love them to bits. And I'd love to hear from you as well, if you could tell me why or what experiences you've had. I have play tested everything I'm about to share a little bit, but not to any great degree. And I decided that as the use of some of these special rules might be a bit situational, rather than make you all sit through a detailed playthrough where I may or may not get a chance to show you everything, I'll just explain what I have in mind and leave you to make your own minds up. So, without any further ado, the first element I'm going to introduce is that of the Piper. Now, we're all very familiar, I think, with the story of Piper Bill Millin, who was attached to Lord Lovat's Special Service Brigade. These men landed on Sword Beach on D-Day, and famously, Lord Lovat instructed Millin to tune up his pipes and play as the men stormed ashore. Now, at first, Millin demurred a little bit, saying, well, War Office regulations state, in light of the huge losses, suffered by pipers in the First World War, that piping is now a rear area thing, sir. To which Lord Lovat is supposed to have replied, and I am paraphrasing him, but my lad, you and I are both Scottish, and that regulation is from the English War Office. It therefore does not apply to us. So that seems to have convinced him, and Millin played up. So throughout the assault on the beach, as the men moved up under German fire, Millin was playing away, and all the way through into the hinterland until the middle of the day, when Lovat's commandos finally relieved the British troops who had seized Pegasus Bridge in the early hours of the morning. So quite a day for Piper Millin, and so he sort of entered the legend and lore of World War II for being this incredibly courageous man who just played on while the bullets were flying all around him. So how do you represent a Piper in a game of Upfront, and what do they do? Well, in the system that I've devised, the first thing you have to do, if you've decided your squad of Commonwealth British soldiers are going to be Scottish, or a regiment eligible for them to have a Piper, once you've set up, the first thing to do is nominate your man. Now, the Piper can be an infantryman, but he must be an infantryman that carries either a rifle or a machine pistol. Any other weapon type is rather inconsistent with the duties of a Piper. So you can't have a Rambo-esque Piper who also hefts around a Vickers machine gun, let's say. That's just not on. So in the example squad I've set up here, I think a good candidate for Piper would be young Private Hodge here. Now, the only other stipulation I have is that the Piper must always be in the same group as the squad leader. So the reason I'm picking on Private Hodge is because he shares a group with Sergeant Vasey. So if you just nominate your piper, make sure your opponent knows who your piper is, and you can commence the game. So how do you activate your piper, as it were? Well, first of all, you'll need to find some way of marking him, because as an action, it's a free action. You can order at the start of your turn your piper to commence playing, and just mark him somehow to indicate that he is doing so. Now, unfortunately, I searched everywhere for something that had some Scottish iconography on it, but I couldn't really find anything. So this incongruous pink cube is going to come to my rescue. So, beginning of your turn, if you decide you want your piper to start playing, mark him. This does not count as a group action. It's a free action that he can take. Now, once a piper begins playing, he can move normally. So if you decide your group's action is going to be a move card of any orientation, the piper can freely move with you. But what he cannot do is infiltrate. I would say obviously he's not going to make his way into an enemy position playing the pipes, that's for sure. So he cannot infiltrate. He cannot fire his weapon. And he cannot engage in close combat. He can be engaged in close combat by an enemy attacking your position. If he is marked as a target by an enemy soldier who is attacking him in close combat, he automatically loses the close combat. So there are risks. The piper is exposing himself quite, seriously to danger by carrying out his piping. So having talked about what he can and cannot do, the next question on everyone's mind is probably, well, what's the benefit to having this guy, playing his pipes and drawing attention to the unit? Well, the benefit is that the group he is a part of, and any group which is in hearing distance, any friendly group that is within hearing distance, gains a +1 bonus to their morale and panic values. But also, and this is a penalty, a corresponding reduction in their KIA threshold. So, and this includes the piper himself, by the way. So what does this mean in practice? Anyone who can hear, let's pick on Private Scarborough as an example, his morale value will go up to 5. His panic value will go up to 6. But his killed in action threshold, it will be reduced on his front side to 7 and on his pinned side to 8. The idea is that you'd be acting a little bit more aggressively, encouraged on by the pipes, or perhaps just advancing to get away from the noise, whatever your preference. But either way, you'd be a bit bolder, but you'd also be a tiny bit more exposed. Now, I mentioned other groups within hearing distance, and I better explain what I mean by that. So let's zoom out just a little bit. To be in hearing distance of the piper, you have to be in a group that's immediately adjacent to the piper's group. So in this case, he's in group B. So anyone in group A or in group C could possibly hear him, but only if they occupy the same range chit. So let's say, for example, he had begun playing at the outset of the scenario when everyone's at relative range 0, and everyone has 0 range chits. That means that both adjacent groups to Group B would be able to hear the piper and benefit from these effects. If the British squad had a hypothetical Group D over here, they would not be able to hear him. So there you have it. Those are the basic rules involving pipers as I've devised them so far. But I'm not going to leave it there, because I feel that in keeping with the way that Scottish regiments have waged war for much of their history, the pipers ought to be part of something a bit more traditional, and what came to mind was the Highland Charge. Now I'm going to put a bit of a qualifier in here. The Highland Charge will remind you a bit of the British, remind you vaguely of the Japanese Banzai capability, but it's not quite as potent. In some ways, it's actually more restrictive and difficult to accomplish. I've got to warn you, it's also probably quite ahistorical, because while it was certainly possible for units to throw in an attack like this, recorded incidents of anything like it are few and far between. And so I had to make sure that it's not a maneuver that players can use willy-nilly. I'll explain what I mean. So in order to conduct a Highland charge, you first of all must have a piper included in your force. This is not an option if you don't have one. You can throw in a Highland charge if your force began the battle with a piper and you subsequently lose him as a casualty, or if he's driven away. So I've set up a Japanese squad just for illustrative purposes here. Let's say that it is much later in the game. I'll take away all the relative range 0 chits. Now let's assume by some miracle there have been no casualties at all in either squad, and they have managed to close quite a distance, with all the groups being at relative range 5. The Highland Charge, as its name implies, is a form of close combat. Let's just go in a bit closer so you can see. Hopefully that's close enough. Right. So in order to throw in a Highland Charge, your group must be within relative range 5 of another enemy group. You can't throw in a Highland Charge from further away. If you meet the criteria for throwing in a Highland Charge, i.e. being at that distance, you play a movement card sideways to initiate the charge. Now this movement card does nothing on the turn it's played except to make you a bit of a conspicuous target. But next turn, as per the Banzai rules, your group can engage in close combat with the enemy group. Now that gap of a turn means that unless you've pinned them down in significant numbers, there's a very real risk that the target group will be able to get off a quick shot before you hit them, and you'll only have yourself to blame for not having tried to pin them first. It's quite a dangerous maneuver. Unlike the Banzai rules, declaring a Highland Charge does not automatically rally pinned personnel. Far from it. In fact, if you have a pinned member in your group, you cannot conduct the Highland Charge, or if you press ahead with it, you have to voluntarily panic and remove them. And in a British squad, you really can't afford to be that profligate. I think most of us will find, at any rate. So, having initiated that, next turn you can enter close combat as normal. Follow all the usual procedures of close combat, except that there is no infiltration. Close combat is automatic. Also, as you enter close combat, conduct a morale check for each man in the attacking group. Don't forget they do get the bonus if the Piper is playing. Now the Piper himself, if his group enters a Highland Charge, will not charge with them. It's assumed that he remains behind. If his group fails in their attack and the others are all eliminated, the Piper is considered eliminated as well. However, as long as he's alive and playing, he continues to impart that morale bonus. Now you'll note I've set up two of these groups. Before I move on to that, as per the Banzai rules, if the attacking group
does not eliminate the group that it's entered close combat with, that group can then counterattack on their turn, as long as nobody else conducts fire combat against the group that attacked them. I hope that makes sense. It's essentially as laid out in the Banzai rules. So, you'll notice, returning to the other point I wanted to get to, that group is at a relative range 5 chit, and the Japanese are at 0, whereas both these groups have relative range chit 3. Now this is important because in this situation, all 3 groups, as long as you had the movement cards to do it, could declare a Highland charge, but Group A could not benefit from the morale bonus imparted by the Piper because they've gone a bit too far ahead. Group B can certainly benefit because the Piper's with that group, and Group C could benefit because they're close enough to hear him. And so that's it, really. Those are my proposed rules for including a Piper in your squad. And those are the rules which I hope will give British units a bit of a sense of being different. I mean, the Commonwealth are modelled quite well in Upfront, extremely well, I should say, but there's not very much in the game that gives you a sense of what the different nationalities within the Commonwealth were like. And if my experiment with modelling Scottish soldiers is successful, I might try similar optional rules with the other nationalities. The Gurkhas would be fun, for one thing, to try a few ideas out with. But I will leave this here for now. I hope these rules make sense. If not, please do post comments, queries, suggestions. I'm more than happy to answer them. And I would welcome any pointers. If you've got any great ideas on how to refine this notion, if you've got any thoughts on how something radically different would work better. As I said at the beginning, if you think they're a complete load of rubbish, please do feel free to say so. I do need to play test these a bit more. If you would like to see a full game involving these rules, then do indicate and I'd be more than happy to oblige. But I've been talking for quite long enough, and as I say, I hope I've made sense. And just to reiterate, these optional rules are just that, optional. Don't feel under any obligation to regard them as canon, because they certainly are not. But I hope you have fun experimenting with them and do enjoy yourselves. So just to say thank you very much for sitting and listening to all of this. I hope you found it interesting and stimulating, and I hope it's given you something new you'd like to try having a go with. As always, a massive hello to my fellow Upfront veterans and indeed anyone else who might be tuning into this. It's really, really awesome, as always, to see you guys. Thank you very much for your company, and I greatly look forward to seeing you in my next video. Take care and thanks again for tuning in. Bye.